Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where our purpose is to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve your organisation sustainably. Learn how to achieve and sustain an excellence journey for yourself, others, and the planet.
And I'm your host, Brad Jevons, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia. We are proudly brought to you in association with SA Partners, a world-leading business transformation consultancy. SA Partners are a truly purposeful company focused on helping organisations achieve sustainable improvement for themselves, others, and the planet.
Welcome to episode 94 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have Mr Scott Coplan back on the show with us for part 2 today. In episode 93 last week, we talked about commercial storytelling and having a leadership team who is committed to excellence, who can engage in dialogue about their organisation's story, purpose, and shared vision, and really connect with all their employees. If you haven't already, listen to episode 93 first. In this episode, part 2, we'll talk about why leaders don't seem to want to engage in dialogue with their staff and the difficulties many have. We also chat about how leaders can get to engage in teams and become really bonded with that shared purpose and vision with all employees, and how leaders can understand why employees might not be performing at their best and what they can do about this. Let's get to it. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Mate, with the thing I'm finding, Scott, is that for many years, we have been studying leadership and soft skills. It's been a constancy, you know what I mean? And I'm all over it too, and I'm still writing about it and training on it. But I find a lot of organizations, and I'm talking Australia because I mainly engage in Australia. I find in Australia, a lot of leaders just don't even engage in a conversation. It looks as if they avoid the conversation or they avoid that problem situation. Do you experience that at all? Are you experiencing any leaders that just do not even enter into dialogue, or it seems like they're avoiding it? They're just not dealing with that person who's upset or a blockade.
I would say that it's rare that you do get the dialogue. And it's even with the dialogue, very, very challenging to be successful. I think the statistics that you noted, or at least alluded to at the beginning of our conversation, are testimony to that. So it's, not an easy undertaking. The fact that you have mentioned that, you're all over it and you've been reading about it, writing about it, and learning about it, and have an enterprise focus that is, sort of a never-ending, undertaking on it, speaks to the fact that it isn't a simple, we can just pick it up and run with it. And so not only is it less common to find people who are open to dialogue, it's also, even when you do, even when people try, it's a very hard road. And I guess the ultimate is, on all of this, I'm not saying, it's so hard, give up. It's the wins that are so powerful that make it desirable to consider and actually pursue the next one. I mean, that's basically why I'm in my career. It is so tough, and it's incredibly satisfying when you have the wins, and it's enough to keep you going to the next one. Yeah. And they are far and few between.
Scott, what you're talking about there is we could have a leader who's sitting there and there is someone who's not aligned to the vision and purpose, and they're becoming a blockade. And that leader could either be, I guess, jumping to conclusions or avoiding the conversation. And I guess there's probably other things that could be happening. But what do you typically find, or do you have any view on why do leaders not go and have that dialogue and try to understand, and then actually truly try to help to get that person in the right seat or align them to the vision and purpose, or in worst cases, find them another bus?
Well, I think, first of all, it depends on where they are. In other words, if you're the top leader of the organization, then there's a real serious problem. And hopefully the parties involved that select that leader will see over time that that leader is really not the right choice for the organization. But if you look at it, and I guess ultimately, just sort of to back up 1 second, I think ultimately, I don't believe people get up in the morning to screw up the organization, to screw up the project, to screw up the jobs of others. Yes, there are, in every group of some size, there's a percentage, and a very low one, where someone is not well and things are not done in a way that are helpful. But I think we, generally speaking, start our day to do whatever you want to call it. I don't want to use a judgmental term, but to participate fully for a greater good. So there are people in the organizations of all kinds that are going to do things that are out of step. And again, it's what is their story? What is their frame of reference? What is their point of view? And I think it's often, as I said from the get-go, they're frightened of something. And they're generally at that very basic level, and maybe they don't realize it themselves. So if it doesn't mean we're looking for someone uncovering a deep psychological insight that they've never been able to share before because you asked them what's going on. But at the same time, I think there's a certain level of understanding where perhaps they just don't know. I mean, I don't know how to do this. I'm scared because of that. I react badly because of it. So if I can get to understand that you really don't understand how to do it, then maybe I can train you so that you do. And that sounds very simplistic, but here's an example. I have a leader, a mid-level leader. So I meet with him or her. Maybe I'm a change agent working with top leadership who is sent to coach leadership at the middle or frontline level. And I'm assigned to work with you. I have to build trust. I've found circumstances where I make very little inroads. I have a person in mind as I'm saying this, but I did make some, and we were able to break some barriers. One of the things I suggest is I try and find a peer of yours, whoever you might be. Let's say you're the challenged leader in the mid-level of the organization. I find peers that you will respect, who have been successful, who you can talk to and who can talk with you. That is, having a peer, an equal, share with you how they're successful helps you feel comfortable because you're equals and I'm not some outsider telling you what to do, and senior management isn't. We have an equal sharing with you what it is they do and how to do it. So essentially there's peer training, if you will, that goes on there. Another one is to have your top leadership check in with you and say, hey, this is what we're doing. We're not seeing that from you, but it's not because we think you're a bad person. Help us understand where you're coming from, and then we can maybe work through that. And one of the outcomes of that is, well, gee, what you're saying makes sense. You've uncovered something. Your resistance, maybe we thought was just, essentially, as you said, being a barrier, when in fact, a classic example, this is an IT, we're going to just roll out the system, and we're going into intensive care, and everything is built around a very shallow level of documentation that's maintained on each patient. Well, guess what? That's not the case in the ICU. They have, history that goes on and detail that goes on in depths that are far beyond what we're thinking. And they're saying, we're not going to implement, we don't trust the system. Well, you find out, you dig out from underneath what's going on. Well, guess what? They pointed out something wrong in the way we're implementing. We need to back up. We need to delay. We need to meet their need. So, that's perhaps not a direct example, but if the leadership is fighting you at that group level, it's telling you something. So in a way, when you see it, it's an itch that needs to be responded to, because it isn't necessarily meant to be an obstacle. It may get communicated, you think that way, but there's insight in it that you can learn from and maybe reshape things, because the information you're getting from that obstacle is something that is on point.
So I'm really getting from this that as a leader, number one, you've got to be curious and willing to enter dialogue. And then also, I guess you need to understand, if you can, the root cause of what's occurring there with the person. I've got a friend, a good psychiatrist in Brisbane, who's a good friend of mine, and he said to me once, I said to him, "How do you do your job? You know, how do you do that?" And he said, "Oh, we ask why a lot, or what's causing that a lot." And again, I'm like, I use root cause to get into that as deep as you can go into the psyche of what's blocking that person, and then help them move forward from that. I was like, well, okay, I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but that was still
well,
quite
but
interesting.
It's so true. There's the five whys. You know, every time someone says something, you ask why, and not to be an obnoxious child, but you're trying to, again, the tired metaphor, peel the onion, get to the root cause, understand. But it's rarely just a factual misunderstanding. There's some, it's all wrapped. The distance between here and there is clutter with all these human emotions that are diverting us.
And our emotions are not. Our emotions are not part of our conscious brain often.
So. No, and it's not linear, and it's basically, I always use the phrase, it's very messy.
Yeah, too true. Go to enterpriseexcellencepodcast.com/downloads to get hold of a book overview and press release Scott has kindly provided us. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast to help others gain insights and create a better future. Let's get back to the episode. Well, Scott, what would be your advice to leadership or even frontline teams looking to go, right, okay, we want to get better at this. We want to get better at being able to, be curious, to go into dialogue, to make sense and then move forward. And we want to be better at helping align everyone to a purposeful vision and connecting their purposeful vision forward.
Well, that's a huge, I'm not sure I could answer that as a single question, because we've talked a little bit about the purpose and how to create it and collectively. And so I'll leave that as I've answered that question. But if from an individual or from an organizational standpoint, how do we get to be better at understanding each other? It really literally comes down to the idea of saying, sense making again of another person, and how do I build in a sense of connection to that person so that they feel a sense of trust to communicate what it is that's going on in their mind. Whether it's root cause analysis sounds so technical, but it literally gets into that trust level. So we've got to be able to take minimal chances with each other and have the outcome be not hit on the side of the head for it. So if I meet with you and I, as your superior, and I set up an environment where I'm going to meet with everyone and as the senior manager of this group, and I'm going to point out that once a week, we're going to have 15 minutes just to hear what's going on. So as an example, my son he's coming out of law school and he's getting a job, and he was telling me about this law firm where the senior partner meets with it's not a very large firm, but it was large enough, whatever the number, 50 people. He meets with everybody like every 2 weeks to just find out what's happening. And I was just like, that's a perfect example. So again, the leadership must drive it, and it must demonstrate that the consequences of communicating aren't met with reprisals. So the model from the methodology that I'm driving at with change management is from Implementation Management Associates, and its methodology is accelerating implementation management. And its model that they use for communication is to express, model, and reinforce. So leadership needs to demonstrate through expression that they are trusting others, that they model it by their behavior. So, walk the walk, talk the talk, or the other way around it would be. But And then the most powerful of them all is to reinforce it. So when it happens with their own management team, it's demonstrated to the whole organization that it is an encouraged behavior. And there's, the easiest way to, when I say reinforcement, it isn't that I'm going to give you a raise. It isn't money. People respond. I mean, not that that isn't desirable, but people respond mostly and most powerfully to gratitude. So if you demonstrate with gratitude, that is a reinforcement level that is never ending. And it's what gets talked about the next day and years from now. When someone does something that shows gratitude, and this, a simple example is there's an implementation, the call center that's handling everything, the medical director shows up like a week after the implementation. It's very successful. And he comes in with a sheet cake and a stack of plates and a knife and plastic forks and napkins. There's no HR didn't come with him and public affairs didn't come with him. He just showed up. He did it himself. And he goes around, he cuts a slice of cake and goes over to each call taker, hands it to them, shakes their hand and says, thank you. Yeah, we couldn't have done it without you. He's walking the walk. He's talking the talk. And boy, is he showing gratitude. And 10 years later, people still talking about it.
Yeah, that's
so
awesome.
Those are the kinds of things that, I could be much more linear in describing it and lay it out in a textbook. But if you tell a story like I just did, I think that's the point. That's what we need. That's how it comes together.
Yeah. Scott, I had an example of that sat me on, just knocked me out as such an amazing technique. A few months ago, I do some work with BHP, and there's a leader there that I think it's every Tuesday. He calls it Tim Tam Tuesday. So Tim Tams are a biscuit in Australia. They're like a chocolate biscuit. They're beautiful. If you can ever get one, get one. But he he calls it Tim Tam Tuesday, and every Tuesday, because they got shifts that cycle. So over a Tuesday, the different shifts cycle on. And he'll take a whole heap of Tim Tams down to the mess room, down to the meeting, down to the staff room, and he'll just sit there, put the Tim Tams out on the table and just sit there. And for the first while, people would hardly talk to him because he was the big boss, the big boss. But over time, he just became part of the crew and he just kept doing Tim Tam Tuesday. And I was like, wow. And now he goes down and he's just part of the crew. And he's just having a conversation. And then they don't even talk about work necessarily. Like work comes up. But
right.
I was like, wow, that is a way to enter dialogue with people, And I think he does that he does another technique with the managers below him. And yeah, it's great, isn't it?
I love it. It's exactly the same as the story I told. And it's so simple. And it just takes sort of shedding all the coverings that we have on ourselves for whatever reason and just connecting. And so trust, connection, dialogue, then we're going to start building a common purpose out of that.
Yeah, that's neat. Scott, thank you so much, mate. I really appreciate the knowledge and input, and thank you for writing such an amazing book. Mate, what's been a recent insight you've had? Like, I know people are going to gain insights from your book and this podcast, but what's been a recent insight you've gained?
Well, it's an interesting question because, I learned how and got certified with scuba diving very recently. And I describe it as there's class as an e-learning in a pool and then in open water. And you go sort of from the spectrum of total terror to at the last session in the water going, this is amazing. So but the learning that I was getting out of it was, okay, I'm putting myself deliberately in an environment that is completely hostile to human life. And the distance between that, literally that death, if you want to put it in most clear terms, and not surviving and enjoying it is, the distance doesn't even exist. It's like they're right in your face. Immediately take off your mask and you'll die. Well, the interesting part about it is that, there's a procedure that if something goes wrong, and there's a backup procedure to that. And that's what you're trained in. they say, as you read through and as you hear about it, that, if we're trained well and develop habits, when things go wrong, we revert to our habits, and therefore we'll have very unlikely that we're going to have a failure, and in this case, die. But how do you do that? How do you create that sense that you're going to jump to your habits? And it was very simple. They constantly say, breathe deeply, pause, think, and then act. It's the distance between death and making a mistake in an organization is very far.
Yeah.
But at some level, I think in our hearts, we're thinking we're going to die if we do something wrong. We feel these horrible consequences. And yet, if we just literally, I was just like, well, it's the concepts of Eastern religion and meditation. Pause, breathe deeply and evenly. Never hold your breath. Never. Now, that's a really bad thing in scuba diving, but at the same time, don't hold your breath in life. Just breathe deeply. Pause, think, and then act. And I think if we all kind of took that in as our rule for the day, we might, next time something goes wrong, remember that 3 steps. And perhaps we'll have better outcomes.
Yeah, I love that. Brilliant, Scott. Scott, thank you so much. Scott, how can people reach out to you? How can they get hold of the book if they want to learn more?
Well, it's available on Amazon. It's called The Integrator. I am Scott Coplan. My last name is a little unusual. It's C-O-P as in Paul, L-A-N as in Nancy. I can be reached through scoplan@coplan.com. I'm on Twitter. My handle is @ScottCoplan. You can look me up on LinkedIn. And we have a website. It's called Coplan.com, again, for Coplan & Company, where much of what I've described here is there in podcasts, articles, and links to the book and other materials. So I welcome just the opportunity to share my ideas for one reason, and that is just to help people do what I think makes a difference.
Yeah, that's awesome, Scott. Thanks so much for everything you have done and you'll continue to do in the future, mate. Thanks for helping us create a better future. We really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and I got to get some of those biscuits. So send me the name in writing so I don't forget.
I will do, Scott. You'll be amazed. Thanks, mate.
Okay, thanks, Brad.
Cheers. Well, Scott, that's awesome.
It went well, I guess.
It was a great episode, mate. Great episode.
All right.
Yeah.
And so is that, you'll let me know and
you're coming out on the 7th to the 6th, 7th of June. And Emily will be in touch leading up to it. She's on fire at the minute. Em's pumping out the podcast. So I think you'll hear from her pretty soon. She'll get the editing done and get that over to you and all the content.
Okay. Well, yeah. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
And let's keep in touch, because when I read about what you've done and what your organization does, it seems like, well, it's a good thing we got together, because I think we have a common understanding.
Yes, common purpose and what we're about. Like it's
absolutely
brilliant. And mate, I gained so many insights from the conversation, mate. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you too. And I look forward to having an opportunity to interact again.
We will, mate. Thanks, Scott. Catch you soon, mate.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. What a great episode. Remember, you can go to our website, enterpriseexcellencepodcast.com/downloads to get hold of a book overview and press release Scott has kindly provided us. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast to help others gain insights and create a better future. There were 2 key takeaways for me from this episode. Firstly, leadership dialogue. Throughout the episode, I really picked up on the importance of leaders being inquisitive, leaders taking the time to understand their people, understand their purpose and beliefs, and how these align or not to the organisations. Leaders entering dialogue with people when challenges arise, working to understand deeply what is causing the challenge, and helping people to overcome that challenge. The second key takeaway for me was storytelling and purposeful vision cascade and how these two connect. A good vision is a story. It describes visually and emotionally the next destination we are heading towards and why. I loved the conversation with Scott on cascading this purposeful vision, helping teams and people connect in their own language linking their purpose and vision for the future with the organisations. Thanks again for your time and knowledge, Scott. Thanks for helping us create a better future. Bye for now.